I was at the bar with my friend Malachi for food and drinks. We were there for about an hour and a half before things took a turn for the worst. We were sitting at the bar having a good time, watching the football game, when I noticed 3 rough-looking biker men walk in through the front door. Their presence didn't matter much at first, and they didn't bother me, and I remember reading one of the backs of their jackets. It said Hell's Angels. At the time, I had never heard of them, but if you haven't, they are a very notorious biker gang, and have made a reputation for themselves as people to not mess with. The bar that we were at sits on a dead end of one of my city's main roads. Right next to it is the trailer park where my buddy Malachi and I live. This will be important for later. The bikers had a few drinks and eventually they scurried away from the bar and took over the entertainment area where they could play pool and gamble with some of their other friends. In total, I guess there would be probably about 12 of them. The louder they became and the seemingly hostile environment we were in made me wonder why I came here in the first place. I'm not a big bar goer, and really I only came here because Malachi practically dragged me out of the house. I do like to drink, however just not at the bar. I'd much rather sit around a campfire with my family or be in the comfort of my own home while watching TV. Suddenly I had the urge to leave, but out of respect for my friend, I decided to wait another half hour before I started to nudge at Malachi. Since we came there together. By the minute, it seemed like the bar was getting more and more packed. It was a Sunday night, like don't you people have work tomorrow? I told Malachi I was ready to leave, and he looked at me like I was crazy. He seemed to be having a grand old time, unlike me. The good news is, we came here together and we didn't drive, so I could technically leave whenever I wanted. Really, I felt like I had to stay for him, but I didn't want to. It was getting late for me, and I was already buzzing enough. I also had work early in the morning, and I was getting sick of being there. This was back when you could smoke cigarettes in public restaurants and bars, and quite frankly, I was sick of being around all the smoke, not being a smoker. After we got into a small bicker about how I wanted to leave and how he wanted me to stay, I got up and left. You know how drunk men can be, sometimes a little hostile. So, as I sat up and walked out the door, Malachi yelled for me, just loud enough for me to hear him, and he flipped me off. Without even thinking, I chirped back at him louder and said a big whole F you. And the whole bar practically turned around and was staring at me. I definitely spoke a little loud. Okay, now that was awkward, I thought. I hurried out of the bar and off I was. The first thing I noticed was how cold it was. It had to have been below freezing. I also just realized how buzzed I was. It was a good thing I wasn't driving. I stopped on the sidewalk for a second to make sure I had my keys, wallet, and phone, and I did. As I passed by all the Harley-Davidson motorcycles, I was greeted by one of the bikers around the corner. I'm only 5'9", and this guy had at least 4 inches on me and was built like a truck. I ran right into him by accident and practically bounced back without him even touching me. Without him even saying anything, I apologized and attempted to walk around him, almost tripping over the sidewalk. I quickened my pace, and before I knew it, I was being tackled and gripped in a bear hug, while I heard more footsteps approaching me. They beat me senseless and almost killed me. The beating lasted way longer than it should have, and they took my wallet. After letting me get up, I could barely see anything because I was bleeding that badly from all over my face. They picked me up and made me take them to my house. Apparently they live in the same trailer park and had seen me around before, so they knew I lived there as well. Cut through a small cornfield to take a shortcut, we walked all the way back to my trailer. Absolutely had no choice. They're going to kill me 100% if I didn't comply. When we finally got there, they ransacked what they could carry with only a couple of trips, and took off in their getaway vehicle with their buddy. Before leaving though, one of them looked at me with a smile, and I understood what he was saying. His eyes were definitely telling me that if I called the police, they would be coming back. So I never called the cops, and they haven't bothered me much since. Apparently I made a name for myself as the pussy hick around the bar, so I never went back. Malachi felt extremely bad and said that they beat me up because I caused a scene and drew a lot of attention to myself by screaming F you. The Hells Angels took that as a disrespect, and they pretty much run the bar, or so they think, and they decided to teach me a lesson that night. As ignorant as it was a lesson learned. At the end of the day, whether I deserved that beating or not, it taught me to mind my own. It was a typical late night run for me. My wife and kids were fast asleep at home, and I needed to train for an upcoming marathon. I am huge into running, and it is an escape for me. Some people think I'm crazy with how dedicated I am to it, and perhaps I am, but it's a part of my life, and as long as I have 2 legs and 2 feet, I don't see my passion dying anytime soon. As I was lacing up my shoes, it dawned on me. We were in the middle of January in Montana, so it was very cold. The roads were still pretty icy from the heavy snowstorm a few days back. This was one of those moments where I really didn't want to run, but those times are the most important for me to just stick it through and get it over with. The roads were empty, and the only sound that filled the night was the pounding of my shoes on the pavement. I was halfway through my 12-mile run when I first noticed the headlights behind me. At first, I brushed it off as just another car passing by, but as the minutes went by, the car stayed behind me, matching my pace. I tried to focus on my breathing and the rhythm of my run, but the feeling of unease began to gnaw at me. The car was too close, and it was pretty late for anyone to be out on the road. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the silhouette of a man behind the wheel, staring at me intently. Panic rose in my chest, but I forced myself to keep running. I told myself that I was just being paranoid and that the car would eventually pass by me, and that maybe he was just trying to drive carefully. I also thought at one point it was a possibility he could be rooting me on. But then the car sped up a little bit and slowed down right next to me, and the man rolled down his window. I couldn't make out his face in the darkness, but his voice pierced through the silence. He rolled up directly next to me. "Where is your daughter?" he asked, pretty much forcing me to stop and turn to look at him. I started to get pretty angry, because for one, he was following me, and 2, what the hell kind of question is that? I turned towards him and I asked him if he was sick in the head, then said he better keep it moving. He was an older gentleman, maybe even twice my age, so I wasn't necessarily feeling like I was in any danger. He looked at me in utter shock, almost as if this is something he does often, picking on people that he thinks won't stick up for themselves. My stubbornness kicked in overdrive, and I decided I wasn't going to let this maniac dictate if I was going to finish my run or not, so I kept running and I told him to screw off. I tried my best to ignore him, picking up my pace and praying that he would just go away, but he persisted. Suddenly, the man in the car reached out a hand towards me, and I veered off the road, sprinting and falling into the ditch. I heard the screech of tires behind me and the revving of an engine, and I knew that I was in real danger. I pushed myself to run faster. After getting up, I ran through the cornfield. At this point, he was definitely following me, and he was chasing me through the field. I thought he was going to run me over, but he just kept a steady pace behind me, and every once in a while, he would act like he was speeding up to try and scare me. Eventually, I cut through some nearby woods and he had no choice but to stop following me. I eventually made it home after cutting through some of my neighbors' yards, and when I got inside, I nearly collapsed. My wife and kids were still sleeping gracefully, so I didn't want to disturb them. I made myself some leftovers in the microwave and went to bed shortly after taking a shower. I decided to never tell my wife about what happened because I didn't want her to worry about me. I never run out here at night anymore though, if that counts for anything. I usually do my run early in the morning before work, or if I really need to run at night, I drive myself to town and hit the track, or run through Main Street and around the small quiet neighborhoods. I also learned my lesson on not forgetting my phone. I used to have a habit of forgetting my phone or just plain out deciding not to take it because when you run long distances, it can be a distraction when anything in your shorts pocket is flopping around, and nearly falling out every 3 seconds. So now I always wear sweatpants with zipper pockets when I run to keep my phone in. It was just past midnight and I was driving home from my boyfriend's house. My car had been making strange noises all week and I hoped it would hold out until I got to my mom's. But as luck would have it, the engine sputtered and died in the worst place it could have. I still had 5 miles left to drive or so, and I was on a pretty remote stretch of road. I certainly panicked as I tried the ignition again and again, but the car refused to start. I sat there in the darkness, trying to calm my racing mind. I knew I had to call for help, but my phone was almost dead. I dialed my mom's number, but the call dropped before she answered. At that exact moment, my phone died. I remembered that I had a phone charger in my center console, but that wouldn't do any good unfortunately, because my car was old and wouldn't charge when it was shut off. Luckily, I remembered I also had one of those portable USB power banks that I was praying had enough juice in it. Thank you, Dad. He had recently bought me it for my camping trip I took a few weeks back, and I never took it out of my car. I plugged my phone in and the Apple logo lit my face. And that's when I saw him. There was a figure standing just beyond the reach of my headlights. I couldn't make out any features in the darkness, just the outline of a man. My stomach twisted with unease as I watched him approach my car. He tapped on the window and gestured for me to roll it down. I shook my head and told him I was fine and that I had already called for help, but he didn't move away. Instead, he just stood there, staring at me. Minutes dragged by as I sat there, feeling his eyes bore into me. I kept expecting him to leave, but he didn't. He just stood there, like he was waiting for something. I was so shocked and frozen with fear that I didn't have the guts to say anything. I didn't want to antagonize him. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized that he wasn't going to leave me alone. Finally, my phone turned on, and I was about to call for help once again. I was trapped in my car with a stranger in the dead of night. I glanced at my barely charged phone and then back at the man. I didn't know what else to do. I called 911 and explained the situation to them. The dispatcher said they would send someone out right away. I hung up the phone without thinking, and I watched as the man's expression changed. He seemed to panic, like he realized that his time was almost up. He backed away from the car, still staring at me with a look that made my skin crawl. After a few minutes, I could finally see the headlights of a police car in the distance, and the man seemed to see it too. In an instant, he turned around and disappeared into the night. When the police arrived to me, I explained everything that happened to the best of my ability. They took my statement and promised to keep an eye out for the man. They offered to take me home as well, and I accepted without hesitation. Couldn't believe what happened, and just knowing that the man had been waiting for the right moment to attack scared me shitless. But at least I was safe now. I knew I would never forget the terror of being stranded in the middle of nowhere with a stranger who wouldn't leave me alone. I told my dad and he was absolutely livid, just like any other good father would be,